Part 3. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 21. When Father Gu heard Gu Mingda's inquiry, he ran down the mountain without stopping. Gu Mingda had no choice but to hold on to his eldest son Gu Yan. Gu Yan looked anxiously at Dad Gu, who was running away, and explained, "My sister suddenly fainted." Gu Mingda was a little strange and asked, "What are the blood stains on your grandfather's body?" Gu Yan was stunned when he heard this, then looked around at the villagers who were full of genuine concern, and finally chose to tell the truth, "We met a wild boar on the mountain." Everyone took a breath when they heard this. It was extremely difficult for the combination of 3 children and an old man to escape from the wild boar. The villagers couldn't help but ask, "Are you injured?" Gu Yan shook his head and said, "We killed that wild boar." The villagers who heard this looked up and down at the children and felt that what they said was no different from fantasy. They even couldn't help but wonder if Gu Yan was lying. But Gu Mingda, the father, believed in his son and asked, "Ian, how old is that wild boar?" Gu Yan said, "About 200 kilograms. The suspicion in the eyes of the villagers became even more serious. After all, a large wild boar weighing more than 200 kilograms was not something they, old and young, could handle. Wild boars are ferocious, and even if they are encountered by an experienced hunter, they may never return. "Ian, are you sure it's a 200-pound wild boar? Did you make a mistake?" "It's actually a small wild boar," a villager asked. Faced with the suspicion of the villagers, Gu Yan explained very patiently, "It's really a big wild boar, not a piglet." Gu Mingda did not question his son, but immediately made a decision and looked around at the villagers who accompanied him unconditionally up the mountain to find someone. These familiar faces are all the villagers who had good friends with him in the past. "Folks, could you please go to the mountains with my Ian and take the dead wild boar down the mountain? Then we can divide the wild boar equally according to the number of heads, okay?" Gu Mingda asked. The villagers who accompanied him up the mountain suddenly became lively. Although they doubted the authenticity of Gu Yan's words, what if they were true? There were less than 10 of them together, and the 200 kilograms of wild boars were divided equally according to the number of people. Each family could get more than 10 kilograms of pork. Who wouldn't want this white meat? It stands to reason that the wild boar was killed by the Gu family. It would be good for those of them who helped carry it down the mountain to get a pound or 2. The Gu family is so generous, so they are naturally happy. After Gu Mingda finished explaining, he left Gu Yan to follow the villagers back to the mountains, while he and Gu Zhao hurriedly chased Father Gu down the mountain. The villagers were originally prepared to have only one wild boar cub, but when they saw a big wild boar lying in a pool of blood, they all became excited. Only one villager, who was an Aryan hunter, looked regretful and said, "It's a pity that the pig's head was smashed and so much pig blood was wasted." Immediately, a villager said, Okay, it's good if they can survive from the wild boar's mouth. How can we take care of this?" At the foot of the mountain, Gu Mingda had made quite a fuss when he went into the mountain to look for someone. Except for a few people who were willing to accompany him to the mountain to look for someone, there were still some people who were just watching the fun. Zhang Guangzong, a relative of the Gu family, was among the villagers watching the fun. Granny Cai had a loud voice, and she was surrounded by a circle of tongue-tied women from the village. "I have told you a long time ago that Niuniu is a disaster star. Whoever touches her will be unlucky. This time it will definitely be her. The second wife of the Gu family now has 2 sons. Now it's better. She is the disaster of them all." Mrscai said. When he said this, it was as if he was sure that Gu Yan and Gu Zhao would not be able to come back from the mountains. "Is this kid really that evil?" someone asked in admiration. Mrscai immediately got excited and said, "If it weren't for this broom star, how could my Jinbei be harmed like that by her? Even now, her face still screams in pain from time to time." On the day Niu was adopted by Zhang Yuniang, Jinbei secretly drank frangipani behind his family's back, but failed and burned himself instead. Because he was delayed for too long on the way to the town to find a doctor, even though he spent a lot of money to buy medicine afterwards, there was still a scar on his face. Scars that are too obvious. How could MRSCAI not feel distressed after waiting for so many years to have her precious golden grandchild suffer so much? She had long been accustomed to blaming all the unsatisfactory experiences in life on her former granddaughter. Some people agreed with Granny Cai, but naturally some people couldn't stand her and retorted on the spot, Niu is only 5 years old, still a child. If she really has such great abilities, how come you Zhang family are still alive and well? Granny Cai, you are a lot older. Oh, you cursed your relatives, you are not feeling guilty. MRSCAI recognized the old woman who refuted her as Zhang Orion's wife, MRS Jin. Zhang Orion has always had a good relationship with the Gu family, and this time he accompanied Gu Mingda into the mountains to find someone. When your hunter son goes into the mountains and never comes out, you will know how evil Niu is. Then I will see how you, an old woman, can support 5 grandchildren. MRSCAI said this with a sour tone. After all, she also envied the other party for having 5 grandchildren. MRS Jin also had a bad temper. Seeing that MRSCAI dared to curse her son in front of her, she was so angry that she rushed towards MRSCAI and stretched out her hand to scratch her face. I asked you, an old man, to curse my son. I'll kill you, MRS Jin cursed. MRSCAI hurriedly escaped and said, your own son is seeking death, and you come here to blame me. Who makes your family not believe in evil? The two women soon started fighting each other. The head of the Zhang family was shocked when he saw this scene. These two people were both Zhang family's daughters-in-law. The fight made other people with foreign surnames in the village laugh. The patriarch did not dare to join the fight between the old ladies. Could only shout hoarsely from the side, okay, okay, stop fighting. But no one listened to him at all, and the two old ladies fought even more vigorously. You curse my son. Your son deserves to have his leg broken, and your grandson deserves to have his face burned, MRS Jin scolded. Not to be outdone, Granny Cai retorted, your son went into the mountains and never came back. Whoever goes in this time will be in bad luck. You can still laugh. Her words aroused public outrage. After all, Zhang Orion was not the only one who went to the mountain to help find someone. Adult men from 7 or 8 households present also went to the mountain to help. In rural families, the adult male is the backbone of the family, and no one can survive this curse. Several women quietly approached the two people who were fighting. On the surface, they seemed to be trying to break up the fight, but in fact they were tampering with Granny Cai during the melee. One pulled a handful of hair, another pinched an arm, or stepped heavily on Granny Cai's feet. Granny Cai screamed repeatedly, who pulled my hair? Who stepped on my feet? But all she faced were those who tried to persuade her, Aunt Zhang, don't fight. In fact, they were trying to offend the old country women, who were extremely powerful in fighting. She had been beaten countless times, but she still couldn't find her. To the enemy's house. The melee continued until Father Gu came down the mountain. When everyone saw him holding Niu, who had closed her eyes and didn't know what was going on, they all immediately surrounded her. But Father Gu was still confused and couldn't explain the reason at all. He just kept mumbling, find the doctor, save Niu. Gu Mingda was also asking the villagers around him, where is Uncle Niu? Where is Uncle Niu? We want to ask him to help deliver Niu to the town. But MRSCAI was so happy when she saw the scene that she forgot that she was covered in scars and said with a smile, okay, this broom star is covered in blood, she killed herself. No one answered Gu Mingda's question, but the relatives of the man who went to the mountain actually believed what Granny Cai said. They grabbed Gu Mingda and asked, "Gu Lao, where is the head of my family? They went to the mountain with you. Now, why are you the only ones out?" Although Gu Mingda didn't know Granny Cai's curse, he still patiently replied, "They are fine, they are just behind." Everyone immediately breathed a sigh of relief. At this moment, Niu, who had been unconscious all the way, suddenly opened her eyes. "Grandpa, why did you go down the mountain so quickly?" Niu's eyes were clear, and apart from her slightly pale complexion, she really couldn't tell where she was going to die. Before Mrscai could scold Niu for her hard life, someone else came down from the mountain. The men who had gone into the mountain came out, carrying a huge prey on their bodies, and all of them were beaming with joy. Everyone also saw the thing they were carrying, and their eyes widened immediately. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 22. My son is back, and he brought a big wild boar back, Jin Posa said to Cai Posa proudly. Cai Posa curled her lips and said sourly, "How long have they been on the mountain? How can they kill a big wild boar? What does this wild boar have to do with your son? Maybe it was killed by the Gu family." Jin Posa's heart skipped a beat when she heard this. Obviously, she also realized this possibility. But her son Zhang Hunter had already said loudly, "This wild boar was killed by the Gu family." Mingda said that we who went up the mountain to find people will share this wild boar equally. As soon as these words came out, they immediately caused an uproar among the villagers. Just going up the mountain to find people, you can share a big wild boar that can be seen to be at least 200 kilograms with the naked eye. Who doesn't want this good thing? The villagers whose families went up the mountain were overjoyed, while the villagers who did not go up the mountain to help find people before regretted it. Some people even looked at Cai Posa with unkind eyes. "You said Niu was a jinx and stopped us from going into the mountains. We were supposed to go up the mountain to help find someone." The villagers lost a good opportunity to share pork, so they naturally did not blame themselves, but only vented all their dissatisfaction on others. Zhang Guangzong's family, who had previously jumped up and down to stop the villagers from going up the mountain, naturally became the target of public criticism. After scolding Mrscai, they felt that it was not enough, and chased Zhang Guangzong and scolded, "You are a scholar. You stopped others from saving the child you raised for 5 years when he got lost in the mountains. You are really a black-hearted person. You are such a rotten-hearted person, you deserve not to pass the exam to become a scholar." Hearing these curses, Zhang Guangzong, who always claimed to be a scholar, naturally couldn't stand it. When his mother had a fight with someone before, Zhang Guangzong, who was proud of his status as a scholar, did not step forward to help. Now that the matter involved him, he could not stand it anymore, and did not care about being polite or not, and directly scolded, "It is obviously you who are afraid of death, and now you blame me." Zhang Guangzong likes to act like a scholar, which not only means that he does not like to deal with villagers, but also means that he has no experience in quarreling. The old ladies in the village are different. Quarrels and fights are an important part of their lives. It is easy to deal with a scholar who is just innocent. "If you hadn't stopped us, we would have gone into the mountains long ago. You bad guys even harmed our relatives. The old Gu family is so unlucky to marry into your family. Yunyang is really a bad bamboo that produces good shoots. She is completely different from you and your black-hearted mother. Although your surname is Zhang, it is not certain whether you are a member of the Zhang family. I have seen many old women of Cai hooking up with wild men in the past. Yes, everyone in the village knows about the mess between old women of Cai and the bald head in the next village. When these old women in the village quarrel, they have no control over their mouths. They say everything and all the bad things of old women of Cai are brought up. Zhang Guangzong has never faced such a scene before. He was so angry that his face turned red and his neck was thick. After all, he was a scholar and still had the dream of becoming a superior person after passing the imperial examination. How could he tolerate such dirty water? But people who are not good at quarreling can only say things like "how can you talk nonsense," and "how can you accuse someone of innocence?" These pale rebuttals seem so powerless in the face of the erotic scenes made up by the old women in the village. As a well-known gossiper in the village, Mrs. Chen is also a taboo-free woman at this time. She vividly describes the 2 or 3 things about Mrs. and the bald man to everyone. "I saw it with my own eyes. In the grove outside the village, Mrs. and the bald man were rolling on the ground with their bald bodies." When Zhang Guangzong heard this, he felt his head buzzing and couldn't bear it anymore. He even forgot the difference between men and women and pounced on Mrs. Chen. "Nonsense, I'll tear your mouth. My mother is loyal to my father, not like what you said." Although Zhang Guangzong is a man, he never does farm work. Chen Pose is an elderly woman, but she works in the fields almost every day. When they really fight, Chen Pose doesn't need anyone's help, and she can hold down Zhang Guangzong by herself. When she was beating people, she was still using her expertise, shouting to everyone, "You all saw it, Zhang Tongsheng flirted with me. He is a scholar, but he actually plotted against me. Seeing that I am pretty, he was beastly to me in public." Zhang Guangzong was going crazy after hearing such nonsense. He was only 30 years old, and Chen Pose was already over 50. Because of years of working in the fields, Chen Pose's face was full of ravines, and most of her hair was gray. She looked older than his mother Cai Pose. Zhang Guangzong felt that even if he was hungry, he would not fall in love with such a country old woman. The reason why Chen Pose dared to be so shameless and didn't care about her reputation at all was very simple, because her whole family was like this. There was no scholar in her family, and compared to a good reputation, her family cared more about the benefits they got. Chen Pose's husband's surname was Lu, which was also the largest surname in Qingshui village. Chen Pose's family was a well-known rogue family in the village. After seeing Chen Pose and Zhang Guangzong fighting, they rushed up to help immediately. The 2 tall and strong men directly lifted Zhang Guangzong up. Of course, during this process, the Lu family often touched Zhang Guangzong, deliberately kicking or pinching him, making Zhang Guangzong unable to express his pain. "You are so brave, you dare to belittle my mother in broad daylight. If you, the Zhang family, don't give us an explanation for today's matter, I will go to the county to make trouble in front of your classmates and argue with them. Tell me what you are," the Lu family said angrily. When Zhang Guangzong heard this, he immediately struggled violently, but the 2 strong men of the Lu family were not vegetarians. They held him down tightly, unable to move at all. "With so many pairs of eyes watching, how can you have the nerve to talk nonsense? Patriarch, the Lu family is bullying me, you have to make the decision for me," Zhang Guangzong shouted to the head of the Zhang family. Patriarch Zhang was not too upset at this time. Earlier when Granny Cai had a fight, Patriarch Zhang got scratched by the old ladies. Now his face was burning with pain. Granny Cai was still being held down. Zhang Guangzong started fighting with others again. He tried to break up the fight as if he was rushing to the scene, making a fuss. Half a day's work was all in vain. But no matter how troubled he was, for the sake of Zhang Guangzong, the only scholar in the clan, Patriarch Zhang gritted his teeth and looked at Patriarch Lu, who was standing aside. Patriarch Lu also had a headache when he saw Mrs. Chen and his family. This was a notoriously rogue family among the Lu clan, and no one in his family dared to provoke them. Of course, Patriarch Lu knew that Mrs. Chen's family was causing trouble today, but if he dared to confront this family, he, the Patriarch, would definitely be troubled by them in the future. Patriarch Lu rolled his eyes and immediately looked like he had a headache. He covered his head and said, "I'm old and confused. I don't know what just happened. I'm very dizzy. Please help me go back and rest." Patriarch Zhang was so angry that he deliberately organized the Zhang people in the village to unite to fight against Mrs. Chen and her family. However, Zhang Guangzong didn't have a good reputation in his family. His eyes were higher than his head, and he barely showed his nose to others. People named Zhang didn't like him very much, so even if the clan leader called for him, it would be of no use. Before Patriarch Zhang could come up with a countermeasure, the Lu family had already begun to make demands. "Today, Zhang Guangzong is frivolous with my mother. If we don't have 30 taels of silver, we will never end it with him." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 23. Zhang Guangzong was so angry that his nose almost crooked when he heard this. He touched the old lady. How dare they ask for her? The Lu family didn't show any fear at all. They surrounded Zhang Guangzong's family aggressively. They didn't say anything about reporting to the official. They just kept saying, "We would like to go to the county to ask and help you make a name for yourself among the scholars. Everyone knows what kind of person you are, Zhang Guangzong, even the old woman in the village will not let you go." The reputation card played by the Lu family almost hit Zhang Guangzong's Achilles heel. When Patriarch Zhang saw that Patriarch Lu did not restrain his family members, he could only swallow his anger and whispered to Zhang Guangzong, "Either you will not take the scholar exam in the future, or you will consider yourself unlucky. If you meet this scoundrel family, we will. There is no better way." It is absolutely impossible for Zhang Guangzong to give up the scholar examination. One night when Nayunia was about half a year old, Zhang Guangzong once dreamed that he was the #1 scholar in high school, paraded in the streets with hairpins, and was proud of the spring breeze. He was so happy. 4 years later, he still kept thinking about this dream. Even though he was just a boy now, he still firmly believed that he was the top talent. So how could it be possible for him to give up the scholar examination? After all kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind, he gritted his teeth and said to those scoundrels from the Lu family, "Isn't it just a matter of compensation? I gave it." Patriarch Zhang felt terrible when he heard this. Zhang Guangzong could promise to give money, but he couldn't say it so happily. Chief Zhang originally wanted to help him negotiate the price, but the outrageous price of 30 taels obviously left room for bargaining. But now that Zhang Guangzong is doing this, it would be good if they don't raise the price. The Patriarch of Zhang said that scholars are just ignorant and don't understand the world. The Lu family was naturally overjoyed. Mrs. Chen, who was crying about being frivolous, immediately stopped feeling sore in her legs and stopped howling. She quickly wiped away the tears on her face and grabbed Zhang Guangzong to demand money from him. Zhang Guangzong was naturally very angry, but he also had a foresight and said, "It is okay to give money, but you must establish a written document. Your Lu family is not allowed to talk about this matter in the future. If I hear about it in the future, I will shout you go to see the official." When Mrs. Chen saw that she had a huge sum of 30 taels of silver, she didn't care about such a trivial matter. She agreed in a hurry. They were also illiterate. After finding a literate person to help read the contents, they took turns pressing on the receipt. Midra. After getting the 30 taels of silver, after leaving the Zhang family, Mrs. Chen sighed to her eldest son. The money Zhang Guangzong used to sell ginseng was said to be gone after building the house. It seems that it was all a lie. 30 taels of silver. The money was taken out without even scratching the surface. Maybe there are more hidden at home. Her son nodded vigorously and was more concerned about another issue. "Mom, we just took so much money and went to Lao Gu's house to get 2 cuts of meat. Our family hasn't eaten meat for a long time. Mrs. Chen lives an extremely frugal life. If it were normal, she would naturally not agree to this. But with a huge sum of 30 taels of silver in her arms, and seeing the pitiful looks of her children and grandchildren, she stamped her foot. By today the whole family is here, I can eat meat. After hearing this, the younger members of the family immediately burst into cheers. They spoke very loudly, and the Zhang family listened clearly in the yard. Zhang Guangzhou was so angry that he fell down again. He had sold Niu Niu to Gu Mingda and finally got 5 taels of silver. Now, before the money was warm, he was blackmailed by the Lu family and paid 25 taels. 2 pieces of silver. Now the Lu family took the money and turned around to buy meat from the old Gu family. In his eyes, this behavior was no different from the money returning to Gu Mingda's hands. However, his son Jinbei, who was 4 years old, did not know that the adults in the family had just suffered a heavy hemorrhage. He only heard others discussing eating wild boar meat, and he immediately started crying and making trouble. I want to eat wild boar meat too. I want to eat it. Go and buy it. When Mrs. was able to control her daughter-in-law, she would never look for trouble on her own. When she saw Jinbei making trouble, she immediately glared at Mr. Cai. Little Cai had no choice but to squat down and hold her son Jinbei, who was like a little meatball, in her arms, and comforted her in a low voice. Jinbei, be good, we won't eat wild boar meat, and my mother will make you plumeria. But although Jinbei was young, his temper had long been bad. He had to get what he wanted. When he heard this, his first reaction was to slap little Cai on the body and push him. I don't eat plumeria. If I don't eat frangipani, I'll eat wild boar. Little Cai was unprepared and was pushed back by her son, staggering and fell to the ground. Jinbei didn't feel sorry for his mother at all, and was still shouting, I want to eat wild boar meat, go and buy it for me. Seeing that his family didn't agree, he simply rolled on the ground, causing the whole family to have a headache. Mrs. Cai was reluctant to scold her grandson, so she could only scold her daughter-in-law. You prodigal woman, you can't even educate a child well, what's the use of marrying you into my family? Little Cai reluctantly got up from the ground. She didn't dare to refute her mother-in-law, so she could only lower her head and keep coaxing Jinbei. But the more he coaxed Jinbei, the more enthusiastic he got, and the more outrageous he said, I won't live if I can't eat wild boar meat. As soon as these words came out, Mrs. Cai felt heartbroken. What she cared about most were her children and grandchildren, and Jinbei was the precious golden grandchild she had been looking forward to for so long. She didn't want to let him feel sad, so she said to Zhang Guangzhou, Guangzhou, otherwise pay some money and ask the villagers to cut some wild boar meat. But Zhang Guangzhou thought of the 30 taels of silver he had lost, and the face he had lost due to the Lu family's harassment today in front of everyone. He suddenly became angry and disliked his son. He directly lifted the little fat man from the ground. Throwing him into the house, he said viciously, I told you to make a fuss about eating wild boar meat. If you make a fuss again, I won't give you dinner. Jinbei was locked in the room and howled like a ghost. Zhang Guangzhou became more and more angry. He slapped Xiao Cai in the face and scolded, you can't even discipline a child, waste. When Niu was in this family before, Zhang Guangzhou would beat Niu when he was angry outside, and others would be scolded at most. Now that Niu is gone, Xiao Cai remembered what kind of person her husband is, and she was so scared that she shrank like a quail. Only Mrs. Cai, as a mother, felt that she could not bear the beating from her son. At this time, she still looked like a wicked mother-in-law, and kept fanning the flames. That's right, this woman has been married for so many years and has only given birth to Jinbei. If it were another family, she would have divorced and returned to her parents' home long ago. But she is not satisfied and only knows how to do bad things. Zhang Guangzhou did as his mother wished, raised his hand and slapped Xiao Cai again, making her hair messy and embarrassed. As Xiao Cai hurriedly dodged, the first thought that came to her mind was that if Niu was still in this family, she would not be beaten. After the wild boar was carried down the mountain, it was sent to the old Gu family. Because the wild boar was already dead, no butcher was hired, but Zhang the hunter was asked to do the butchering and divide the meat among the people who went up the mountain together. This pig was heavier than the Gu family estimated with their naked eyes, almost 300 kilograms. After slaughtering, the actual meat obtained was more than 200 kilograms. According to the number of people, each person could get 15 kilograms of meat. Including the 3 children, there were a total of 5 people in the Gu family who went into the mountain and got more than 70 kilograms of meat. As the main force in killing the wild boar, they did not even get half of the wild boar meat. When old lady Gu saw more than 100 kilograms of wild boar meat being divided, her eyes were almost full of heartache, but Gu Mingda had already said that he would divide it equally. Even if old lady Gu was dissatisfied, she did not say anything to spoil the fun. At most, she was too distressed to continue watching the meat division scene. Old Gu and the people from the second branch of the Gu family in the room didn't care about the distribution of pork outside at all, and they all surrounded Niu. Niu was stared at by everyone, drinking the hot water in the cup in small sips, and repeatedly said, "Grandpa, Dad, Mom, Big Brother, and Third Brother, I really don't feel uncomfortable anywhere, I'm fine." Niu finished drinking the water, put down the cup, and jumped on the spot to show that she was really not injured. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Gu Mingda insisted, "Let's go to the town to see a doctor. If we don't see a doctor, I'm always worried." As soon as he finished speaking, a woman's exclamation suddenly came from the yard. "Mom, this wild boar meat was obviously killed by our father, why did he give away so much meat?" Lu Ernie's voice was so loud that it was clearly heard by everyone in the room. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 24. The first and third wives of the old Gu family went out to sell tofu. Chen Chunyua took this opportunity to accompany her husband back to her parents' home, Qinjia village. She wanted to stay there longer and also hoped to help her husband sell all the tofu. Lu Ernie was different. She was not familiar with the people in the neighboring village, and she could not help her husband if she went there. She simply took a piece of tofu and went back to her parents' home while her mother-in-law was not paying attention. When Gu Mingda was pulling people to go up the mountain to find Niu, Lu Ernie wanted to help, but was stopped by her mother. Liu's mother's reason was also very sufficient: "If you go out, what if they ask your brother to help? The person was lost in Daking Mountain. That Niu is very unlucky. Who knows if she was eaten by something because of playing too much. Don't drag your brother down." The Gu and Lu families are in-laws. According to secular conventions, if something happens to the Gu family, the Lu family will naturally lend a hand to help, and the men of the Lu family will lead the team going into the mountain. Lu Ernie obviously valued her mother's family more. When she heard this, she immediately shrank back and pretended not to hear Gu Mingda calling people around the village. She helped with work at her mother's house for a long time before she heard the noise in the village. The Lu family was just joining in the fun to watch the jokes of Zhang Guangzong's family at first. When they heard that the old Gu family got a wild boar in the mountains, they immediately couldn't sit still, fearing that the third branch of the Gu family would not get the advantage. When they knew that the wild boar had to be shared equally with others, not to mention Lu Ernie, even Liu's mother was furious. The old lady's logic was very touching. If her daughter didn't get any benefits, it meant that her family also suffered a great loss. Lu Ernie and Gu Laosan's things had long been regarded as her own possessions by Liu's mother, and the wild boar meat of the old Gu family was equal to her wild boar meat. Lu Ernie was encouraged by her mother and immediately ran back to the Gu family in a hurry, trying to stop them from dividing the pork as soon as possible. Gu Mingda in the room frowned slightly. Zhang Yuniang immediately said, "I'll go out and take a look." Gu Mingda frowned slightly, "I'll go with you." The two sons also had a curious look on their faces, and even Nayuniu stretched her neck, looking outside. "Dad, I want to go out to help Grandma," Gu Zhao said, thinking he was very considerate. Gu Mingda didn't indulge him, and directly pointed it out, "If you want to watch the fun, just say it." Gu Zhao laughed and didn't feel embarrassed at all. Gu Mingda didn't scold him, but looked at the eldest son Gu Yan and said, "You can't go out, your eldest brother will explain the reason." After that, he ruthlessly took Zhang Yuniang out. Gu Zhao looked at Gu Yan pitifully, and Nayuniu had the same expression. Gu Yan reached out and touched the top of his sister's head, and said softly, "Aunt San is an elder, Grandma should scold her, a gentleman should not look at anything indecent." Gu Zhao spoke quickly, "I am not a gentleman, and neither is Niu Niu." Gu Yan. He took a deep breath and said, "The elders are about to fall into a difficult situation, and the younger generation should avoid it." As he explained, the loud voice of Mrs. Gu outside could be heard in the house. "Where have you been all afternoon? You don't care about your nephew and niece's disappearance. You are so angry when you thank the villagers for some pork. When will it be your turn to call the shots in this family?" Old Mrs. Gu quickly defined the matter without waiting for the villagers who entered the mountain to be dissatisfied. Lu Ernie didn't even stop others from sharing the wild boar meat, and she was also scolded by her mother-in-law. "This is the wild boar that my father killed. For a non-blood related Niu Niu, you are too willing to spend a lot of money." Lu Ernie defended in a low voice. But she didn't know that among the three daughters-in-law, the mother-in-law, Mrs. Gu, disliked her the most. Although Chen Chunyua had her own little calculations, she was still thinking about the first house. And the third daughter-in-law, Lu Ernie, not only had many little calculations, but also caused many disputes in the family. More importantly, this daughter-in-law's mind was all on her mother's family. What Mrs. Gu hated most was this kind of stupid person who couldn't see her own position clearly. She didn't know how to feel sorry for her own children, but instead worshipped her nephews and nieces from her mother's family as ancestors. In Mrs. Gu's view, this was purely a brain failure. You also know that it was the old man who killed the wild boar. What does this have to do with you? If you have the ability, go up the mountain and kill one yourself. It's not your turn to make the decision in the Gu family. If you make trouble again, I will let the third son divorce you, Mrs. Gu said viciously. She was not such a mean person at ordinary times, and rarely said such words of divorce. Today, she was really angry, and in front of everyone, she didn't leave Lu Ernie any face. She did this for everyone present to see. The Gu family came to Qingshui village as refugees. Although they had settled there for decades and had been divided into several families, they were still a minor family in the village. Regardless of whether Gu Mingda could pass the imperial examination in the future or whether he would have a promising future, as long as it was said by her own son, even if old lady Gu felt painful, she would help her son save face. Since the division of meat was a foregone conclusion, it had to be done beautifully, and no one could stop it. Lu Ernie could not understand the twists and turns in old lady Gu's heart at all. She had always been short-sighted and could only see her own losses. She was still calculating how much meat she had lost in her heart. She was so wrong that she almost cried on the spot and couldn't help but want to make a fuss again. Old lady Gu was annoyed and directly pulled people to the woodshed. People in the yard could vaguely hear a few scoldings. Gu Mingda didn't like outsiders watching his family's excitement, so he immediately urged everyone, "Is it time to give the meat to brother Zhang Wu? Can I have the hind leg meat?" Although the excitement was fun, the meat they got was real. A group of people immediately turned around and began to devote all their enthusiasm to dividing the meat. There was someone who could talk. He was holding meat in his hand and praising Gu Mingda non-stop. "Mingda, You are generous. With you, the old Gu family will have no worries about not being prosperous in the future. Yes, yes, you scholars keep your word, but ordinary people are not so willing. Some people also started to use Gu Mingda to bully Zhang Guangzong, saying, there are not many scholars like Mingda who are sensible. Isn't there a scholar in our village who wants to sell his daughter to get married in the underworld? When Gu Mingda heard this, there was no joy on his face, but he said very seriously, although Guangzong sold his daughter to make money, he may not have much money and has his own difficulties. After hearing this, everyone laughed and said, what trouble can he have? Is the person who took the 30 taels of silver at his word really short of the 5 taels of silver that sold the girl? Isn't it because he is greedy and lustful? The men in the country started gossiping, and it seemed that they had nothing to do with women. Someone immediately sensed that something was wrong and asked, lawful? Why is Zhang Guangzong so lecherous? His mother-in-law is famously beautiful in our village, and he has a lot of trouble outside. Do you know anything? Tell me. The first person to speak was questioned by everyone, with a very unhappy face on his face, and said, you don't know this. Zhang Guangzong, this kid, looks honest on the surface, but in fact he is having a lot of fun in private. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 25. This man with a long tongue really likes to tell people off. Zhang Guangzong stayed in the town for half of last year. Do you know why? Why? Say it quickly. After being pressed several times by everyone, the long-tongued man slowly told what he knew. The tofu zishi at the east end of the town, the man who runs business outside all year round, do you know? That woman has very seductive eyes. Is there any connection between her and Zhang Guangzong? The man with the long tongue nodded and said, if it weren't for such a beauty, why would Zhang Guangzong stay in the town every day? If the man hadn't come back, Zhang Guangzong would probably still be in the gentle village. Someone immediately raised questions and said, do you follow Zhang Guangzong every day? Otherwise, how would you know this? The man with the long tongue said, of course I don't follow him every day. I occasionally go to the town to deliver goods. Every time I pass by Dongtu, I can see Zhang Guangzong sneaking out of there. Oh! Everyone let out a long-sounding sigh. The man with the long tongue had reached this point, and they no longer had any doubts about what he said. Gu Mingda did not participate in their discussion, but silently kept it in mind. Mrs. Chen, who was bringing her children and grandchildren to buy wild boar meat, was also listening. At this time, her eyes were rolling, and she didn't know what she was thinking. A wild boar was cut up by a hunter and was quickly divided into pieces. The villagers got the wild boar meat and did not stay at Lao Gu's house longer. They left happily with the meat. Before leaving, they even kindly helped the old man. The Gu family cleaned up all the dirty floors. When Gu Boss and Gu Lao-san came back, they could only rely on the smell of blood in the air to confirm that they had indeed shot a wild boar. The reactions of Boss Gu, Chen Chunyua, and Lu Ernie were not much different. At this time, they were beating their chests with hatred. Boss, if you ask for help, just help. How can you give up so many benefits? 1 pound for each family, no, half a pound meat is enough, how can you give so much? Mrs. Gu had a gloomy face. She was only focused on protecting Gu Mingda's face, and was not really willing to give up so much meat. She would also feel heartbroken when she was repeatedly reminded of her family's losses by the 2 men with the hammer. Okay, the meat has been divided. You 2 are in a good mood. Does this meat have anything to do with you? Mrs. Gu scolded. Although Lu Ernie had just been punished by Mrs. Gu, now that she saw her man back, she immediately got excited again. She pulled Gu Lao-san and began to instigate her more and more. The wild boar was obviously killed by our father. We really want to talk about it. It's time for us to share the house equally, but the second brother is acting generous. He is using our father-in-law's money to save his own face. Gu Lao-san has always been soft-spoken, so he couldn't stand his wife's instigation. He immediately said, "Mom, since it is not our third brother's turn to be the master of the Gu family, it should not be the second brother's turn to be the master." When Chen Chunyua heard such a powerful rebuttal, she suddenly became excited. "Yes, yes, yes. Mother always scolds our eldest and third bedrooms, and I have never heard you scold the second bedroom. You still say that you are not partial? This time, my second brother Zhang Ye, the reason why the pork is distributed is not for our Gu family." From the beginning, the second brother went to the mountain to find a second wife and a few children. Mrs. Gu frowned. She didn't expect that one day she would be a general of the third house. But it was exactly as they said. This time, it was indeed Gu Mingda's private decision to let the whole family pay the bill. Mrs. Gu never felt that she was a partial old lady, and she was racking her brains to think of words to defend herself. At the critical moment, Father Gu stood up. The wild boar was killed by Niu Niu. Everyone laughed when they heard this outrageous statement. Chen Chunyua even said directly, "Dad, you still don't believe me when I say you are confused. How old is Niu Niu? She is so small and not as tall as a wild boar. How can she kill a wild boar? Even if you favor Niu Niu, you still have to be reasonable. Why do you just open your mouth to say anything?" Others nodded. Even Gu Mingda was doubting the authenticity of his father's words at this time. Chen Chunyua still felt that it was not enough, and added, "Dad, please see clearly, Niu Niu looks like a daughter at most, but she is not a real daughter." But this sentence ruined things. Dad Gu, who was still sitting peacefully, jumped up from his chair when he heard this and said anxiously, "Niu Niu is Nanan. Nanan is Funanan, and Niu Niu is Funuaniu. She is my child." As he yelled, he pulled his hair hard, twirled around in circles in a hurry, and kept saying these words. When Mrs. Gu saw her man going crazy with anger, she immediately gave her eldest daughter-in-law a hard look and scolded her, "If you can't speak, just shut up. If you get mad at me, old man, I won't be done with you." Being a sick father-in-law is considered a great act of unfilial piety. Even if Chen Chunyua is favored by her mother's family, once she carries such a reputation, the Chen family will be stabbed in the back in the future, and it will be difficult for her nieces to find a good husband. Chen Chunyua later became frightened and couldn't help but hide behind Boss Gu. Boss Gu wanted to step forward to help, but his mother pushed him away and refused to let him touch Dad at all. Mrs. Gu stretched out her hand to hold down the hand holding Mr. Gu's hair, and comforted her softly, "Old man, Niu Niu is just a girl. No one can change this. Don't worry." When Father Gu heard this, his turbid tears fell down and he said vaguely, "How could I not recognize my child? Nanan is like this, she is so blessed, that's why God wants to take her back." Mother Gu nodded vigorously and said, "Yes, our Nanan is the most blessed girl in the world." Father Gu continued, "The rabbit was hit to death, and the wild boar was also hit to death. They all died for Niu Niu." Gu Mingda keenly observed that when mother heard what father said, her hand paused and her expression was also dazed for a moment. Gu's mother looked at the children present, hesitated for a moment, pulled Gu's father into the house, and said softly, "Old man, tell me, how did you encounter wild boars in the mountains?" Gu Laeta and Gu Lao-san wanted to follow in, but were stopped by Gu Mingda. "Let mother ask father, if you don't trust mother, then bring the 3 children here." Regarding the killing of wild boars in Daking Mountain, the first and third wives caught the 3 children and questioned them for a long time. The conclusion they came to was not as outrageous as Gu Laeta said, but it was indeed a great bargain that fell from the sky. "I asked people to go into the mountains to find my 3 children and our father. Our father is so old and confused. What if something happens to him in the mountains? Although the benefits I promised are a bit many, it is also to allow the villagers to work harder to find him. After Gu Mingde was labeled as a filial father, the first and third wives could no longer accuse him of being generous with public property. After all, no one wanted to be known as someone who didn't care about their father's life or death. Gu Mingde continued, "When I promised to share the pork, I didn't know that it was a big wild boar that died. I thought it was just a piglet. I was too concerned, so you should blame me." After the big hat, Gu Mingde said a few more words of reflection. He said all the positive and negative words by himself. No matter how dissatisfied the first and third wives were, they could only keep it to themselves. When the entire Gu family quieted down, Gu Mingde found his mother privately and asked, "I used to study in a private school for many years and rarely spent time with my younger sister. Mother, you all said that my younger sister died of illness that year. Is there any hidden story behind it? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 26. After Gu Mingde showed his talent for reading when he was young, he spent most of his time in school. After careful calculation, he basically lived in private schools in the county after he was 10 years old. The old Gu family has always been particular about keeping a bowl of water balanced. Even if Gu Mingde, his son who is studying, comes home, he will be asked to help the family with housework and farm work. Therefore, Gu Mingde has not had much contact with his younger sister. When Gu Mingde occasionally recalled it, he could only vaguely see a blurry child's face. He only remembered that his daughter was very beautiful, like a porcelain doll, but he couldn't remember exactly what she looked like. When he received the news that his little sister was seriously ill, he took leave from school to come back for a visit. Unexpectedly, as soon as he arrived at the entrance of the village, he heard a heart-wrenching cry coming from his home. His little sister fell ill and died too quickly, so he hurriedly hurried back and didn't even get to see her for the last time. "Your little sister, she is a very lucky child," Ms. Gu said with difficulty, her eyes gradually becoming moist. Recalling the memories related to her daughter, Ms. Gu felt like she had had a short and beautiful dream. The little daughter is like the perfect daughter given to her and her husband by God. Although she is young, she is well behaved and considerate. Even in their imagination, they could not imagine that there is such a good child in the world. It is precisely because the little daughter is perfect that the two eloquent parents can't wait to put the best in the world in front of her. Father Gu was stimulated and gradually became confused after the death of the little daughter. Ms. Gu suddenly grabbed Gu Mingde's hand and said, "Second brother, I would rather die than her." Gu Mingde gently patted his mother's back. Nayuniu suddenly fell into a coma today. He was also curious for a moment, so he thought of asking a few more questions, but he didn't expect that it actually aroused his mother's pain. He suddenly couldn't bear it and said, "Mom, I won't ask any more." When Ms. Gu heard this, she shook her head and said, "Even if you don't ask, I still want to tell you. You are the smartest person in the family. There are some things that we can't figure out. Maybe you can figure it out, Nayuniu. Nayuniu is also a blessed child, no matter whether this child is the reincarnation of Nanan or not, she can never be like Nanan." When Gu Mingde heard this, his heart sank, as if the worst had happened. Ms. Gu wiped her tears hard and said, "Do you still remember your father's wine recipe?" Gu Mingde nodded. The elder had mentioned this before, and he suspected that he had taken this brewing recipe. The ancestors of the Gu family do have a recipe for brewing wine, but it's not really that special. It's just that when the family has a lot of food, they brew a little wine to support the family. It's not worth asking taverns from all over the country to come to buy it. After listening to his mother's words, Gu Mingda immediately thought of a possibility and asked, "Dad, he has improved the wine recipe? Does this matter have something to do with my little sister?" Gu nodded and said, "Not long after my daughter turned 1 year old, she saw your father making wine." The little man suddenly said, "Dad, you are wrong." Gu Mingda recalled the appearance of several of his children when they had just turned 1 year old. The eldest, Gu Yan, was the smartest one, but even at 1 year old, he spoke awkwardly. "My sister is so smart." Your father didn't know that Nanan was special at that time. He laughed and teased her and asked her what was wrong. Nanan said that the order of brewing was wrong and that there were missing things. "I don't know how to brew, and I don't remember what the order is." And there was something missing. Your father's expression changed when he heard it. When Gu talked about this, she still looked full of regret. After all, if she remembered this wine recipe, her family would still have this extra income. "Your father really made wine according to the method," Nanan said. "At first, I thought your father loved his daughter and blamed him for wasting food. But I didn't expect that the jar of wine brewed according to the method," Nanan casually said, "has supported us. The family now lives in this blue brick house." Gu looked at her house with a look of sadness. Lao Gu's family lives in a blue brick house, which is second only to the village chief's house in Qingshui village. After so many years, the number of people who can live in blue brick houses in the entire village can only be counted on the palm of a hand. Gu added, "But the night after Nanan finished telling her the recipe, she started to have a fever. Your father and I took her to the town to see a doctor in the middle of the night. It happened to be a coincidence that the fever subsided as soon as she arrived in the town. She can jump and jump as if she had never been sick, but your father asked her about the wine recipe again, but she didn't remember it at all." Gu Mingda was shocked when he heard this. He thought of what happened on the mountain today. Nyunia fell into a coma inexplicably and woke up again when she came down the mountain. It was so similar to what happened to Nanan back then. And he still remembered how Niu left the Zhang family. She had a high fever that didn't go away all night, and was taken to the town by Yun Niang, and her fever immediately went away. It was simply a repetition of history. Gu continued, "At that time, your father and I just thought that Nanan was too young and could not remember many things clearly, so we did not continue to think about it. After the family received a subsidy from selling alcohol, life gradually became better and we saved a lot of money. We raised our daughter until she was 5 years old. We thought we had raised the child, so we took her to the temple to fulfill her vow." Gu Mingda didn't understand why this happened again, and couldn't help asking, "What else do you wish for?" Gu explained, "After giving birth to you 3 boys, your father and I have been looking forward to having a little girl. We go to the temple to burn incense every year. 1 year, after seeing a clay sculpture of a virgin added to the temple, your father I told the Bodhisattva that I hoped to give birth to a little girl who would be as blessed as a virgin. It didn't take long for me to get pregnant and give birth to my daughter." Gu couldn't help but shed tears again, and said, "If I had known that too much blessing would lead to an early death, I would not have let your father and Bodhisattva make such a wish. I just want my daughter to be safe." When Gu Mingda thought of his lost second son, he felt extremely empathetic. The pain of losing a child was unbearable for every parent. "I thought she was 5 years old and stood still, so I dared to take her to the temple to fulfill her vows. But as soon as we entered the temple and explained our purpose, the host's face changed drastically. He said that the child asked for in the temple was 18 years old. In the past, we were not allowed to enter the temple anymore. It was not a good thing to say that we broke the rules." Gu was already in tears at this time, her eyes full of self-blame and regret. "It was us who were ignorant and harmed our daughter." Gu Mingda quickly comforted him, "Mom, don't think so. The host only said it was not a good thing, and he didn't say it would cost my daughter her life." Gu shook her head and continued, After your father and I came back from the temple to fulfill our vows, we were extremely cautious. After a month of this, nothing bad happened. Your father still behaves like this every time he goes into the mountain. As in the past, there were always pheasants and rabbits coming to our door, and we could easily find wild fruits and mushrooms hidden in the woods. We no longer cared about the host's words until after Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 27. Gu Mingda's heart was in his throat when he heard this. Ms. Gu's cloudy eyes were still full of regret, and scenes from the past kept flashing before her eyes. She had imagined countless times how great it would be if she had agreed to that person. She turned her head, saw her son's nervous eyes, smiled sadly, and said, "That day when your father came down from the mountain, he saw his daughter playing with people at the entrance of the village from a distance. He was about to walk over when he suddenly saw someone beside him." The Taoist stared hard at Nanan. "Your father said that the man looked very young, probably in his early 20s, but his eyes were wrong." Gu Mingda quickly asked, "What's wrong?" Ms. Gu frowned and said, "According to your father, those eyes are not the eyes of young people, but more like the eyes of old people, with a heavy turbidity and no vitality that young people should have." Gu Mingda took a breath after hearing this. Ms. Gu continued, "Your father felt unhappy when he saw him, and stepped forward to drive the man away. Unexpectedly, the man could accurately tell us the situation of our family as soon as he opened his mouth. Your father thought at first that the man was inquiring in advance. After that, I continued to drive the Taoist away, but I didn't expect that the Taoist said that our big yellow dog would give birth to 7 puppies in the middle of the night, 5 white and 2 black. When your father came back and mentioned this, the whole family felt that this man was joking. This was not the first time that the big yellow dog at home had given birth to puppies. Even if we didn't know what color the dog's father was, the big yellow dog would give birth to several little ones every time. It's impossible for dogs to give birth to all other colors. Domestic female dogs give birth to puppies almost every year, giving birth to several puppies at a time until the female dog dies." Gu Mingda asked, "Did the yellow dog really give birth to puppies that night, and the colors of the puppies were exactly the same as what the Taoist said?" Ms. Gu nodded and said, "The Taoist said all these things that have not happened yet. Naturally, your father was convinced by the Taoist's miraculous powers. He saw the Taoist again at the entrance of the village the next day, and he did not dare to neglect it again this time. The Taoist asserted at that time that there would be a Wenku star in our family in your generation. Your father was overjoyed when he heard this. The Taoist asked you carefully about your birth dates, and your father told him. After some calculations on the spot, the Taoist said that the literary star of our family is you, but you are destined to be evil. There are twists and turns in participating in the scientific examination. If you want to resolve it, you need to do something else." Gu Mingda recalled the various problems he had encountered in the imperial examinations over the years, and he even became a little convinced of this man. "Your father begged the Taoist to do this, but the Taoist didn't want gold or silver. He only wanted your sister. He wanted us to offer to trade your sister for your future. Of course we refused." The Taoist left angrily. 10 days later, your sister suddenly fell ill in the middle of the night. The doctor took one look and said it was hopeless, and refused to even prescribe medicine. The day your sister died, the statue of the Virgin in the temple was shattered to pieces. Now that I think about it, if I had known this earlier, it would be better to let that Taoist take away your sister. Maybe she is still alive now, and that Taoist can also do something to resolve your fate. You have a bright future." Seeing the sad and regretful look on his mother's face, Gu Mingda said directly, "Mom, even if my sister is taken away by that person, she probably won't survive." Ms. Gu stopped wiping her tears with her hand. Gu Mingda explained, "Mom, that person came with bad intentions. He came here for my sister from the beginning. The magic he showed was just to make you parents willingly hand your daughter over to him. When he found out he couldn't get it, he got angry and killed his sister. Gu was slightly stunned, grabbed Gu Mingda's hand, and asked eagerly, "Is that so?" Gu Mingda felt uncomfortable. Thinking about it carefully, what wrong did his parents do? Just because he didn't understand the rules, he took the child into the temple to fulfill his vow. No one would have thought that such a small move would have painful consequences like landslides and tsunamis. If possible, they hope Nanan is still alive more than anyone else. The two old people were in enough pain. Their father became confused because of this incident, and their mother had often avoided people and secretly grieved over the years. It was obvious that they were both immersed in the grief of the past and had not come out of it. Gu Mingda didn't understand these supernatural things, but it didn't stop him from coming up with reasons to comfort his mother. The Taoist man appeared strangely. "You said that my sister was very lucky. You can't say that he did some weird tricks to take my sister away. It was just to seize luck. Although my sister was killed by him, she also had the opportunity to be reincarnated. She was thinking about you, so she returned to our home again. If she falls into the hands of that Taoist, she might not even have the chance to be reincarnated." When Gu heard this explanation, she thought of the birthmark on Niu Niu again, and kept nodding to brainwash herself, saying, "Yes, yes, yes, if Nan Nan was not reincarnated, how could Niu Niu have the same birthmark? She is Nan Nan." Gu Mingda continued, "If my daughter really blames you and Dad, she will never come back to our house. She has been thinking about you and Dad, so she is back after all the hardships." Even though Gu's eyes were dry from crying, she couldn't help but feel a sore nose when she heard these words, "My daughter, there is no better child than her." Gu Mingda comforted her softly, "There is nothing better in the world than a family reunion. Don't be sad, you will break your body from crying." Gu nodded vigorously. She thought of something else and couldn't help but ask, "Your father and I didn't resolve the evil spirit in your life. Can you blame us?" Gu Mingda chuckled and said, "Mom, I have to fight for my own future. If I really trade my sister for my future, wouldn't I be a villain who sells my sister for fame? How can I live up to the sage books I have read for so many years?" Old Lady Gu looked at him with pride, thinking that this was her best son, a gentleman who grew up reading sage books. After comforting his mother, Gu Mingda returned to his house with a tired face. Niu Niu was covered with a quilt and sat in Yuniang's arms. The mother and daughter seemed to be whispering something. Seeing this scene, Gu Mingda felt that all the fatigue in his body was swept away. He didn't care so much about blood relationship. He just felt that since the child called him Dad, he should treat her as his own child and love her. He had some kind of guess in his heart at this time, but he still needed to confirm with Niu Niu. Gu Mingda said softly, "Niu Niu, Daddy has a few questions to ask you. If you want to answer, just say it. If you don't want to answer, don't say it, okay?" Niu Niu tilted her head and looked at him, and said, "Dad, as long as Daddy wants to know, Niu Niu can tell Daddy. Niu Niu doesn't want to hide it from Daddy." Gu Mingda looked at the little girl's trusting and obedient appearance, and his heart seemed to be hit hard by something. At this time, he finally understood what his mother meant by the perfect daughter. Anyone who lost such a child would miss him for so many years. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 28. What were you thinking about that night when you had a fever at Zhang's house? Gu Mingda asked from what he knew about Niu Niu's first fever. Niu Niu is now 5 years old, not a child, and can already remember many things very clearly. I. Niu Niu glanced at Zhang Yuniang a little shyly, but she didn't have the nerve to say it to her face. Zhang Yuniang didn't expect that Niu Niu was thinking of her that night. She gently held the child in her arms and said, "Na Yuniu, you can say whatever you want. Your parents won't laugh at you." Niu Niu's heart fell into reality and she whispered to Gu Mingde, "I was thinking, it would be great if my aunt could be my mother. I would definitely not beat or scold me. Thinking about it, I felt all over my body. It's boiling hot and my head feels dizzy." Gu Mingde immediately understood the cause and effect. Niu Niu first thought about asking Zhang Yuniang to be her mother, and then she got angry. He asked further, "Then what were you thinking about when you met the wild boar on the mountain this afternoon?" Niu Niu opened a pair of big, watery eyes. For a 5-year-old child, her speech was unexpectedly clear. Wild boars are so ferocious. I was hoping that it would be great if the wild boar could be killed like a rabbit. Then the wild boar could be killed. It was really hit and killed. Gu Mingden naturally knew what was going on with the hare, just like it was a gift that Dakingshan must give to Niu Niu. The hare jumped out of the grass on its own and knocked to death on the stone where Niu Niu was sitting. He has now probably determined that Niu Niu's first fever and coma this time were probably due to her wish. Just like what the old couple said, she is indeed a blessed child. She is favored by God. Whatever she wants, God will work hard to deliver it to her. But what Niu Niu passively accepts, such as the golden turtle on the Zheng family's stall and the hare killed on the mountain, will not bring any consequences. But if Niu Niu asks for it, God will give it to her, but it will bring some sequelae, such as burning for a night or being comatose for a period of time. The severity of the sequelae will be determined based on the difficulty of the wish. Gu Mingde looked at his daughter seriously and said softly, "Na Yuniu, you are a special child. If you want anything in the future, just tell your father and make as few wishes as possible in your heart, okay?" Although the sequelae of wishing do not seem to have much impact at present, this is an illness after all. No one can say whether the disease is still hidden in Niu Niu's body, or whether making wishes again and again is making Niu Niu weaker. Niu Niu's big eyes were full of doubts and she asked, "Why can't you make a wish? I also hope that my parents can." Gu Mingde suddenly covered her mouth gently to prevent her from saying her wish, fearing that God would hear her and the consequences would fall on Niu Niu again. "Na Yuniu, what parents want depends on their own efforts. Although the things obtained by making wishes are good, parents also hope to enjoy the process of hard work, get pleasure from the efforts, and learn a lot of useful things." "That's right, Na Yuniu, you don't want to take away your parents' happiness, right?" At this age, Na Yuniu probably didn't understand the side effects, so Gu Mingde could only use this explanation to coax Na Yuniu. This kind of talk is very effective for Niu Niu. The little girl nodded vigorously and said, "Dad, I don't want to cause trouble, I am a good child." The little girl has big eyes and sparkling eyes. After staying at Lao Gu's house for a while, some flesh has grown on her cheeks. Her soft little appearance makes people feel distressed. Gu Mingde touched the neat little braids on Niu Niu's head and coaxed softly, "Niu Niu is a very powerful child. All her wishes can come true. If the bad guys find out about this, they will take Niu Niu away from her parents. Take it away, Na Yuniu, please don't tell others that you will make a wish." Niu Niu did not agree immediately, but asked Gu Mingde, "Can't you tell grandma about this? Where are the brothers?" Gu Mingde was stunned when he heard this, but after a moment he shook his head and said, "This is a little secret between Na Yuniu and her parents. You can't tell anyone except your parents." Niu Niu looked like she didn't understand, and said, "Ni Niu understands. Niu Niu listens to your parents." Gu Mingde and Zhang Yuniang looked at each other again, and Zhang Yuniang said, "It's getting dark, Na Yuniu should go to bed." After talking so much, Niu Niu felt sleepy and couldn't help but yawn. Zhang Yuniang began to hum softly a song to coax children, "The moon is crescent, the wind is gentle." When Na Yuniu heard her singing, she suddenly raised her head and looked at Zhang Yuniang with her eyes wide open. Zhang Yuniang looked puzzled and asked, is it because my mother doesn't sing well? Niu Niu shook her head, pressed her fair and tender face against Zhang Yun's mother's face, and said softly, Niu Niu loves to listen. My mother before could only sing to Jinbao. Zhang Yuniang felt sour in her heart. She was about to say something, but when she lowered her head, she saw that Niu Niu had closed her eyes and fell asleep. No matter how many times she saw her, Zhang Yuniang still couldn't help but admire her daughter's ability to fall asleep instantly. The little girl had no distracting thoughts and fell asleep immediately after finishing speaking. Zhang Yuniang carefully placed the child in the middle of the bed. The two sons were squeezed into the same bed with the boys in other rooms, and now there was a Niu Niu sleeping in the middle of the couple's bed. After confirming that the child was asleep, Gu Mingda said, Yuniang, Na Yuniu is very special. She is so similar to Nanan. She may really be the reincarnation of Nanan. Everyone among the people firmly believes in the theory of gods and ghosts. If there is anyone in this family who does not believe in the theory of reincarnation, it is Gu Mingda. But after experiencing these, Gu Mingda's belief also collapsed in an instant. When Zhang Yuniang heard this, her first reaction was not fear, but distress and joy. She felt sorry for Niu Niu's fate of dying young in her previous life. She was glad that she could be her daughter and be loved by her whole family in this life. Whether she is a daughter or not, she is my daughter now, Zhang Yuniang said firmly. Gu Mingda gently held her hand and continued, Na Yuniu, like Nanan, has very amazing abilities. In the afternoon, after I knew that she could respond to requests, I actually thought about whether we could ask Na Yuniu to help us find Xiao. Xiao was the couple's second son. He was lost a few years ago. The couple searched all over the place but could not find any trace of him. It was as if he had disappeared from the world. Zhang Yuniang didn't know how many times she secretly cried. If Gu Mingda hadn't kept persuading her, she might have gone blind from crying. Zhang Yuniang hopes to find her second son more than anyone else. Now her husband tells her that as long as the youngest daughter makes a wish, she can get her back. She didn't know how much strength she had to use to force herself to say these words, we can't let Na Yuniu help. In the dark night, tears slipped silently down Zhang Yuniang's cheeks. As if she could see it, Gu Mingda reached out and gently wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. You also said that Na Yuniu has to pay a price for praying to God. The fact that the mistress got lost has nothing to do with Na Yuniu. We can't involve her in this matter and let her suffer in vain, Zhang Yuniang said in a low voice, choked with sobs. Gu Mingda had long known that his wife was of noble character. At this time, her thoughts were the same as his, and he was even more grateful that he could become her husband. He had no intention of letting Niu Niu get involved in this matter, so he said softly, Yun Niang, I am lucky to be able to marry you in this life. If Xiao Er suffers outside, when he goes to the underworld in the future, all the sins will be pinned on me. He's fine, but I didn't take good care of him. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 29. The old Gu family divided more than 70 kilograms of wild boar meat. It is still early for the Chinese New Year. Logically speaking, it is enough to keep a few kilograms for home use, and the rest can be sold to the villagers at a cheaper price. But Lao Gu's family only sold a small part and kept most of them. The children of the Gu family cheered for joy. After all, if the meat was not sold, it meant that they could keep it at home and eat it. After eating for several days in a row, the children did not feel tired at all. On the contrary, they were as happy as if they were celebrating the new year every day. Mrs. Gu actually wanted to sell most of the wild boar meat, but Gu Mingda stopped her. Now that my family sells tofu, life is better off than before, and there is no need to save as much as before. The children are growing up. The young man will be strong, and it will be easier to find a wife in the future. The young girl will have a strong body, and she will not be afraid of giving birth in the future. It's sad this is what Gu Mingda advised Mrs. Gu. Mrs. Gu was also a grandmother who really loved her juniors. Even though she still felt pain, she still accepted the suggestion. For the boys in the Gu family's big house, what makes them even more happy is that Gu Mingda's private class has finally closed. Gu Mingda is about to leave for Fukan to take the college examination. He can no longer teach the children to read and write, but he still assigned a lot of homework to them before leaving. It's just that brothers Gu Yun and Gu Jin didn't take it seriously. After all, they hadn't finished their homework, and there was no punishment for the second uncle. As long as they avoided their parents, they wouldn't need to be beaten at all. The two brothers immediately became like birds let out of a cage, looking around for cats and dogs. The two of them were not happy for long, and they were severely suppressed by Mrs. Gu again. Mrs. Gu was very strict with her own sons, but she was a little more doting on her grandchildren. This time it was still Gu Mingdajan's slander that allowed the old lady to maintain the high-pressure education in the past. They all have to stand up for themselves in the future. The eldest brother and sister-in-law are too doting. If they are not polished, they will develop a weak temper in the future. Mom, you don't want Gu Jin to finally become a carpenter as his teacher in the future, but because of you can't learn without enduring hardship. Listening to Gu Mingda's persuasion, Mrs. Gu's heart skipped a beat. After all, Gu Jin had such a lazy attitude when it came to studying and practicing calligraphy. If he became a carpenter's apprentice in the future, he might not be able to endure hardships. Mrs. Gu couldn't help but scolded her eldest son and his wife. Children in the country knew things early, and no matter how old they were, they had to help with the household chores. However, the eldest son and his wife spoiled their two sons in such a way that they were not worthy of their respect. Gu Yun is already 14 years old, and he still hangs out with cats and dogs all day long. Unfortunately, the autumn harvest has passed now, and there is not much farm work at home. After thinking about it all night, Mrs. Gu forced the two boys in the big room to learn how to weave baskets and ropes from Dad Gu. Dad Gu was a little confused. In order to persuade him to teach, Mrs. Gu had to spend a lot of time and coaxing to get him into the mood. When Chen Chunyu learned about this, her first reaction was not that her son had finally learned some skills. Instead, she said to Mrs. Gu, "Mom, does the stuff they made up belong to our big house?" Chen Chunyu's idea is very simple. Although the rope frame they weave is not worth a lot of money, the couple now goes out to sell tofu every day. Anyway, she didn't want her whole family to take advantage of her. Mrs. Gu is also a good person, so naturally she understood the eldest daughter-in-law's little plan on the spot. She didn't get used to it, and kept spouting, "Why don't you say that the shit they poop belongs to your big house? You take it back and eat it up. If you really want to be so clear-cut, then you can raise your own children. You have spoiled your two children for playing around. If I were you, I would be so embarrassed to say these things." Chen Chunyua was scolded so much that she couldn't hold her head up at all. Mrs. Gu was so stimulated by her that she went to extremes. Originally, it was enough to let the two children make up 1 hour a day, but now she acted like an evil overseer, watching the two grandsons doing their work all day long, causing them to complain endlessly. "So tired that I couldn't lift my arms." Gu Yun and Gu Jin even began to miss Gu Mingda, feeling that when their second uncle was at home, learning to write was not as painful as weaving baskets as soon as he opened his eyes. The two people's efforts were not in vain. Old Gu's family accumulated a basket of woodsheds in a short period of time, and Mrs. Gu took some time to go to the town and sell the frames at a low price. Chen Chunyua also wanted to share part of the money from selling the baskets, but she was severely scolded by Mrs. Gu again. After they ran out of bamboo sticks for weaving baskets at home, the Guyun brothers thought their hardships were over. However, they did not expect that the old lady urged them to go up the mountain to collect firewood. They had tasks every day to ensure that they would not be idle all day long. Gu Mingda had no idea that he had harmed his two nephews. He had already taken his wife and daughter and set off with the traveling caravan. If you take a normal carriage, you can reach Fukan in about 10 days. However, when the caravan went north, its destination was not Fukan. Instead, it went to Jiangnan first, and then turned back after reaching the capital. The caravan stopped and went on the road, and basically stayed for a day or two in every small town it passed. The caravan carried more and more goods, and more people paid to travel with the caravan, and there were many of them. Like Gu Mingda, he was a young student who was going to Fukan to take the exam. Although the speed is very slow, this is what Gu Mingda is happy to see. After all, he has a family and 3 children who are not very young. If the schedule is too fast, they may not be able to bear it. Gu Mingda also met acquaintances in the caravan. He had participated in too many college examinations, and it was inevitable that he knew many scholars from various counties. This time the caravan passed by Huai's county, and there were more guests in the caravan, and he happened to be among them. Acquaintance. Brother son, this is my wife and 3 children, they are. Gu Mingda introduced his family to Sun Jiaxing. Sun Jiaxing and his wife Li looked at the children of the Gu family with envy. They have been married for more than 10 years, but they have no children so far. Sun Jiaxing's friendship with Gu Mingda is actually quite condescending. The ranks of scholars in the imperial examination are Tongshen, Zioki, Juren, and Jinshi. Gu Mingda is only a Tongshen, but Sun Jiaxing is a Juren. Sun Jiaxing followed the caravan to go to Beijing to participate in the joint examination next year. Although Tongshen can also make the villagers look up to him, he has not actually stepped into the threshold of the imperial examination and cannot enjoy any benefits of the imperial examination at all. After becoming a Zioki, he can be exempted from taxes on a few acres of land. In the future, he will not continue to take the examination and can open a school in the town to accept apprentices. Becoming a Juren not only exempts you from taxes on 300 mu of land but also means you have 1 foot in the officialdom and can seek an official position. Although it is difficult to climb higher, it is also a world apart from ordinary scholars. Sun Jiaxing and Gu Mingda are about the same age, but they are already preparing to go to Beijing to take the exam. They are really young and promising. What is more rare is that despite the huge difference in their status, Sun Jiaxing is still willing to interact with Gu Mingda. His wife Li is also a very kind person. After glancing at the 2 children of the Gu family, her eyes fell on Niuniu. Seeing the little girl looking at her with big eyes and a worried face, Li couldn't help laughing and teasing, "Little girl, is there something on my face? Staring at me like this?" Zhang Yuniang pulled Niuniu and was about to tell the child that it is impolite to stare at people all the time. Unexpectedly, Niuniu suddenly cried out, "Wow! And son, you can't go to the capital," Niuniu said loudly. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 30. This turn of events was something no one expected. Zhang Yuniang looked a little embarrassed and explained to Niuniu softly, "Niuniu, your aunt from the Sun family is going to Beijing to accompany your uncle from the Sun family to take the exam. This is their family matter and it has been decided long ago." Although Sun Jiaxing and his wife were read like this by the little girl, they were not angry. Sun Jiaxing could not help teasing Niuniu and said, "Niuniu, I am going to Beijing alone and going to a place I am not familiar with. I am very scared. You don't want aunt to accompany me, otherwise, you will accompany me to Beijing." Niuniu didn't understand that this was an adult's joke. Instead, after thinking carefully, she nodded and said, "If you can make auntie stay, Niu Niu can agree to it. Sun Jiaxing burst into laughter immediately. He already knew the origin of Niu Niu from the conversation with Gu Mingde just now. The child was not the Gu family's biological child, but adopted by the couple. Sun Jiaxing looked at Niu Niu's cute appearance and couldn't help but think, if he was really destined to be childless, then adopting a child as lovable as Niu Niu seemed to be a good thing. Gu Mingde asked from the side, Niu Niu, why don't you want Aunt Sun to come to Beijing? Can you tell Dad the reason? Others present only thought the children's words made people laugh, but Gu Mingde felt that Niu Niu was not the kind of child who loves to show off. She must have her reasons for saying such things. Niu Niu looked at Li's belly with worry and said crisply, my little baby has a wrinkled face, it's so hard. Sun Jiaxing and others were confused when they heard this. Gu Mingde asked, where is the little doll? Niu Niu said, it's the little baby in Aunt's belly. When everyone present heard this, their expressions changed drastically. And when it fell on the ears of Sun and his wife, who had been seeking a child for many years and got nothing, it was like thunder. Baby? Niu Niu, does Auntie really have a baby in her belly? Ms. Li asked eagerly. Niu Niu nodded vigorously and said, Auntie, you really can't go to the capital. The little one wants to rest and doesn't want to travel far. Although Ms. Li knew that this was just the talk of a child, she was extremely hopeful that it would be true. If she is really pregnant, then she really can't continue to Beijing. She is not young at all, and it is rare for her to be pregnant. The long journey of nearly 2 to 3 months is really not something she can bear. Brother Sun, there seems to be someone in the caravan who knows medicine. Why don't we let someone come and take a look now? Gu Mingde suggested. Sun Jiaxing carefully helped his wife sit down. Although he had not confirmed the news yet, his eyes were full of enthusiasm. Juran's wife might be pregnant, so the people in the caravan did not dare to neglect it, and soon an old gentleman came. The old gentleman was not a member of the caravan. Like Gu Mingde and others, he was an accompanying traveler. He was originally going to visit relatives in Fukan. At this time, he was called over temporarily. After carefully checking his pulse, he frowned and pondered for a long time. Doctor, how are you? Ms. Li was the one who was looking forward to the child the most, and was more anxious than anyone else at this time. She and Sun Jiaxing were a young couple, and Sun Jiaxing was also a passionate person. They had been married for more than 10 years and had no children. He had never said that he wanted to take a concubine, but she also knew that her parents-in-law had long been dissatisfied. This time her husband brought her to Beijing. In order to have someone to take care of her, she actually didn't want her to stay at home and be harshly criticized by her parents-in-law. Ms. Li was grateful for her husband's loyalty, but she also knew very well that once the word carry on the family line was suppressed, her husband could not shirk it for too long. If he was still childless in a few years, he would have to take a concubine sooner or later. The old doctor felt his pulse and pinched his beard. Several strands of his beard were broken off. He couldn't say anything accurately. He could only say, the time is too short, it seems to be there and it seems to be nothing. If it takes another half a month, to probably confirm whether it is really Huamai. Others only felt disappointed when this news came to their ears, but the Sun family and his wife were filled with ecstasy. The reason is also very simple. This is almost the closest Li has ever been to being pregnant. The monthly letter that usually comes every month is as sure as the rooster crows, which shows that all the efforts in the past month have been in vain. Sun Jiaxing's face was bright red and he said to Gu Mingde, old people say that children have the cleanest eyes and can see things that ordinary people can't see. Although the doctor is not sure, Niu Niu said so, and it is probably true. She is pregnant, thanks to the child this time, otherwise we might have made a big mistake if we were confused. Gu Mingde hurriedly said, Niu Niu is also a child, so whether she is really pregnant or not depends on what the doctor says. Naturally, Everyone would be happy if she was really pregnant, but if she was not pregnant, Gu Mingde was also afraid that the couple would blame Niu Niu. Although he speculated that Niu Niu would not be wrong based on her special characteristics, but he still had to be prepared for everything. Sun Jiaxing is also a smart man. After hearing this, he immediately said, "No matter whether my wife is pregnant this time or not, I am very grateful to Niu Niu. Even if the joy is in vain, at least I will feel at ease when I go to Beijing." Gu Mingde felt relieved and said deliberately, "Brother Sun, it's still early and the convoy has just set off. It's better to wait until we get to the next town to confirm that we are pregnant and then discuss countermeasures." Although he didn't know whether the pregnancy was real or not, Sun Jiaxing didn't dare to take a gamble and said categorically, "It's been a long journey, how can this be done? I will send my wife back now." Gu Mingde added, "But what should I do if my schedule is delayed due to rushing for the exam?" Sun Jiaxing said very simply, "It doesn't matter. The caravan is moving slowly. I'll work harder and come over later." Gu Mingde nodded and said, "Since Brother Sun has already made a decision, I feel relieved." Sun Jiaxing and Li left very quickly. They had their own carriage, so it was not too abrupt for them to leave the team and return. But before leaving, Li couldn't help asking Niu Niu, "Tell me, is the baby in Auntie's belly a boy or a girl?" Gu Mingde was about to stop her, but Niu said, "I don't know." Li didn't get the answer she wanted, but she didn't get discouraged. She gently stroked her belly, which had not yet bulged, and got on the carriage carefully. After the carriage disappeared at the end of the road, Gu Mingde squatted down and asked, "Niu, did you really see Auntie Sun's belly with a baby?" Niu nodded vigorously and asked, "Can't you see it?" Gu Mingde smiled and shook his head. Zhang Yuniang looked at Niu with a worried look on her face and asked, "My husband, if this gets out, will it be bad for Niu?" Gu Mingde said, "It's okay. Children have clean eyes. They saw that someone else had a baby in their belly. There are similar rumors in the surrounding area. It's not out of the ordinary." Zhang Yuniang was relieved immediately. Gu Mingde asked again, "Niu, do you really not know whether the child is a boy or a girl?"